press conference. Σήμερα έχουμε αρκετά πράγματα να πούμε. Σαν το καινούριο DNV GL Group, θα έχουμε την ευκαιρία να σας δώσει ο κύριος Dr. Mager, που είναι ο καινούριος Director of Communication του DNV GL Maritime, τις τελευταίες εξελίξεις. On behalf of Mr. Athanasios Rezopoulos, welcome to this press conference. I'm sure everybody knows also Mr. Dr. Mager, who, by the way, is the new Director of Communication of DNV GL, new brand. I think he will share some, I would say, interesting information on the latest developments regarding this merger. So, Olaf, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. Kalimera. I was told that I'm allowed to give you a kind of update on the merger and what it is all about. I'm more than happy to do that. I would like to point out that we had to learn that the Norwegians are very informal. So in Norway, you are all on the first name basis. So that's for us as Germans is not something which we are accustomed to, but it's interesting to be able to call our new boss, Henrik Madsen, just Madsen, Henrik. As you see, I still have to learn. Today is the 36th annual meeting of Germanischer Lloyd Committee, Hellas Committee here in Athens, and I'm very happy to be here once again. It's much more pleasant to come to Athens than to travel to Oslo, because you have to take an early flight. Usually at 4:30 you have to get up to be ready at 6 o'clock at the airport. Flying to Athens is much more convenient. You are interested in the merger. The merger has been announced in December 2012, just a few days before the Maya prediction was going to happen. The world is going to go bust, but apparently this didn't happen. Within the last 8 to 9 months, we had been intensively working on preparing what is there to be prepared. We were invited to look into all the policy areas where we have to come up with some answers, what we would like to do after we were allowed to share our data. Because within this standstill period, you are not entitled to exchange data on your revenues, on your customer basis, on your projects. So that was a very difficult period of time, but on the other hand, we had sufficient time to learn about our companies and to meet people and to have an early idea who is going to do what on the top level and then later on the second level. I would like to point out in this presentation why this merger makes sense, why we are more than happy to be now, at least in the area of classification, to be the #1, and then I would like to point out some of the practical implications of our customers. I'm very happy that I was allowed to attend the presentation by Erik van der Noorder, who just gave this presentation to the members of the Hellas Committee. The rationale, why DNV GL? Henrik has made a statement where he has tried to summarize the idea of the merger. First of all, we have to take into account that this is and has been a stakeholder decision, that at least the stakeholder and the owner of Germanischer Lloyd has thought that it would be a good situation and a good opportunity to move GL to the next level. And you have seen and developed and seen and observed our development in the last years. And when DNV started the discussion with Mr. Herz and his family office, it was pretty clear that this would be a good idea. It would make strategic sense to really merge our cultures and values to become the biggest classification society in order to provide a higher intensity of services, a broader scope of activities, and obviously many other elements which I'm going to explain. There are two complementary players, and complementary is important because if you are looking later on to the statistics of our ship in operation structure or fleet in service structure, you can clearly see that we are having the same kind of expertise, that we are having the same kind of history, that we are both companies with a strong home market but an international and global perspective, and that there are complementary market segments which easily being fitted together and which are really giving us a competitive edge. Especially if you look at what GL has done in the last couple of years, you can see that our owner has invested heavily in making sure that the classification society has some additional competencies in the oil and gas business and in the renewable business. And that is really something which has increased our attractiveness for DNV. And if you do some comparison, you can clearly see that it was DNV and GL who had been strong in technology development. If you look at the question of LNG, it was DNV and GL who has promoted that topic, LNG as a substitute for heavy fuel oil. Obviously, what is important and what is really helping the merger going on is that we share common values and that the skill set is similar. So that's these are preconditions of a good merger. If you look at the structure, DNV GL group, which has been now enjoying the first week, the first operational day was the 12th of September last week, and or the week before. And DNV GL Group has two owners: the DNV Foundation, which owns 63.5%, and Mayfair, who was the owner of GL, has a share of 36.5%. Having said this, that is something which is of no greater importance at the time being. More important is that DNV GL is a Norwegian company, and this Norwegian company has four important and strong business areas. The first one is maritime. Maritime will be based in Hamburg. The head office is in Hamburg, in the former GL Group head office. It has the strongest proportion of all other business areas in terms of employees. There are roughly 6,000 employees in maritime, and it's it will have offices in roughly 80 to 100 countries. Oil and gas is something which has been developed in GL with the acquisition of Noble Denton in 2009. But if you look at Germany, we do not have any offshore experience. We have no oil explorations in the North Sea, but DNV or Norway has, and therefore DNV is pretty strong in that, and the business area will be located in Høvik at the group seat of DNV GL. It will have roughly 5,800 employees, and it is a market which is going to be developed even further given the need for energy. Energy is the third business area, which is focusing on renewable energies, wind and solar, and in addition grid technology. As you know, we are now developing a lot of renewable wind parks, offshore wind parks, but in Europe the grid situation is not as advanced and sophisticated as it should be. And KEMA, which is a company in the Netherlands based in Arnhem, has the expertise of testing grid connections. So they are now in the process of investing some 70 million euros to build up new laboratories where we can stimulate supergrid connections, how we are optimizing the energy network in Europe. So just if you would like to see a good example, Greece would decide to have a higher output of energy by renewable solar or wind energy, then somebody has to transport the electricity, and you have to have networks and you have to make them work, and you have to make sure that you are not losing too much energy on the transportation from, let's say, Greece to France. And that's what DNV GL Energy are going to do, in addition to advising customers what they could do, testing, etc. And then we have an area, business assurance, which is based in Milan, in Italy. It's focusing on business assurance, certification of health products, food, beverages, and these kind of things. And that's something which has not been covered by GL so far. So in this respect, we had not been too much concerned about any merger issues in this respect. I mentioned it, it's a very interesting element of this merger that we will have an expanded international network. There will be roughly 10,000 experts in Europe. The interesting thing is that out of these 10,000 experts, some 80 to 90% have an academic degree, have a degree in naval architecture, machinery, engineering, whatsoever. So the qualification level of this stuff is really high. Interesting enough, Henrik Madsen pointed out when he made this presentation in Hamburg the other day that we are now even stronger than ABS in the United States, with roughly 3,000 engineers in the US. And as you know, shipbuilding has moved to the east. We will have some 4,000 engineers, surveyors in Asia, predominantly in Korea and China and the neighboring states. Altogether, we will be present in 100 countries, and we'll have roughly 17,000 employees. Compared to the previous situation, this is an important milestone. Obviously, we are going to earn some money. We have some revenues. It's 2.5 based on last year's figures. And the risks are enormous, and this is something where DNV GL will offer all its competence. And a very interesting topic, given the political the development of the industry, and I already mentioned business assurance. If you look at the revenue situation, you see that oil and gas is very prominent. It has the biggest share. Maritime and business assurance is having a stable customer base, which is going to be there. We are rather proud that we have all the necessary tools and resources available, that ships are serviced and surveyed at the given time. We will be able to merge our expertise, and that's something which is really exciting for all our engineers. You always have to look not only on what our customers are saying, but at the same time you have to motivate your own people, you have to motivate your engineers. They are dedicated to what they do, and you really have to have a good case to make them appreciate the new opportunities. And at least those who are working for research and development are extremely pleased that it has been decided that at least 5% of our revenues will be invested in research and development, not exclusively for DNV GL Maritime. There are other areas where we have to invest in research and development too, but in the end this will be giving us another competitive edge in terms of making sure that people and customers and maritime stakeholders recognize our leading position. And the challenge which we are facing today, working closely together in making sure that we will be able to fulfill our promises in terms of having one harmonized rule book, gives us the opportunity to make sure that we are providing easy to use rules in 2015 which allow our customers to streamline their operations, which is cutting red tape, which are more efficient. And Eric van der Noorder just made the suggestion in the committee meeting that we should have a clear idea of how long a specific rule should be applied, because there are rules which are not being reviewed within a certain context, and that's something where we can really initiate progress. I mentioned the global network. This is something which has some relevance here too. We really are going to reinforce our regional network, and especially those networks where we have a strong customer basis, and Piraeus and Athens and Greece is such a region which will be reinforced, and we are now going to merge GL's workforce with DNV's workforce, and will clearly make sure that we are fulfilling the expectations of our Greek ship owners. The committee and the discussion and the questions just next door have clearly showed that there are some questions related to the way how we are going to be perceived in the market. Mr. Laskaridis made some comments on what could change and what he expects, and that was basically shared by all others. It's a wait-and-see attitude, and that is reflecting what Eric van der Noorder has mentioned, that we will be able to start our merger now. It is a step-by-step approach, and it will take time, and he asked for some patience. But most important, with this kind of competence, with this kind of expertise, with this kind of network, we will be able to provide better services faster, and our availability will be much higher. The setup of our organization will clearly be focused to provide the necessary services and the necessary progress in technical developments closely related to the requirements of the regions. That is something which is important here in Europe, in Greece, in Shanghai, as well as in Singapore. And we are going to copy the regional structure of DNV, which has been for years very strong in respect to its relationship to Hövik, and the regional managers will have a basis where they can actively approach the customers, develop the business, and that's something where we can clearly gain. As you can expect from a merger of two complementary classification societies, if you pool all the resources, you come up with the overview of all vessel types, and Henrik Madsen has mentioned that he is expecting that we are basically leading are the leading classification society in all the various ship types, whether these are super yachts, cruise vessels, offshore platforms, or tankers. As you can see in another presentation or in another chart later on, we will have strong market shares in each of these ship types. What I personally find extremely interesting from a GL perspective is that this topic of offshore classification has been moved from the oil and gas segment to the maritime segment. Because there was some debate whether this should remain in oil and gas, but in the end it is similar to ship classification. You have to have rule developments, you have to make sure that these platforms are safe, and since oil and gas has not been so strong in rule development and has not been geared to rule development but more to advisory, to verification, this is something which is going to be now handled by maritime. And if you look into the market, there are interesting projects, whether at the coastline of Brazil, West Africa, China, or even in the Gulf of Mexico, where we are now really getting our acts together to develop market strategies to compete, for example, with ABS. That's going to be an interesting exchange of views and an interesting competition. I mentioned it already, DNV and GL had been perceived as those classification societies who had been very active in providing new technology, promoting progress. We have reported about what our research and development department has done over the years, making sure that customers are aware of the changes in the regulatory environment, and this has been somehow been done by DNV as well. We have always competed in this respect. There has been always a benchmark who is going to promote what, and there are great similarities. If you look at LNG, or if you look at the way of how we are optimizing vessels, that we both have supported energy efficiency. Just remember the recent bow exchange example, which is basically old technology. We have had that example already published 4 years ago. It's something where we can clearly see that we are at the same track, that we have a similar mindset, where we are really fitting together, and that is something which is extremely important for the idea and for the suspicion whether it's going to work or not. And I'm fairly convinced that this is going to be extremely successful. What are we going to do in the near future is obviously making sure that despite all the work related to the merger, we will focus on our customers. We are not going to lose track of the most important asset in the market, our customers, and we can, and I can assure you that whenever there is a speech to be made, or whenever Eric is saying something to the staff or to department meetings, we are always focusing on customer relationship, that people are not taken, and that people are not too much focused on the merger as such, but that they keep on with their daily routine, with their daily work, in order to make sure that customers are not suffering from the merger activities which are going on in the background. Here is the chart which I wanted to show you, where you can clearly identify that the merger has some substantial results, is shifting the ranking of the classification societies, and it's a huge obligation for the new setup. It's a huge obligation in terms of making sure that this is going to be reflected in various regions, because if you look into various local and regional markets, you can clearly discover that in some areas we are not in the first or second position, but that there is room for improvement. And that is something where the business development department is now going to work out marketing and business strategies to really make sure that we are gaining more market shares in various local markets. It's interesting that the market share is roughly 24%, and this is a percentage which has not caused any eyebrows with those antitrust organizations which had looked into the case of the merger, which had to approve the merger, and as you know, such a merger has to be approved by a number of regulatory bodies like the Korean Antitrust Authority, or the Chinese one, or the European Community, or the US Antitrust Authority, and all of them have approved this merger without any additional requirements. There are no conditions attached to it, and this is something which clearly shows that this merger is somehow changing the game. At the same time, as I pointed out, we will have to carry a great responsibility, and we will have to make sure that this leadership function which we now have has to be filled with substance, with commitment, with engagement and motivation of our staff. As the offshore segment is going to be in high demand in the next decades, this is something which is really contributing to the business, and which is a complementary asset which we are really looking forward to work in. I personally had nothing to do with floating offshore, with the floating offshore market. GL was not in that. We just had some wind turbine installation vessels, but it's not comparable to all those installations which are required in the oil and gas markets. But here as well, we have some market share, but it is important to recognize that the real big market player is ABS, and with good reasons we have increased our, and we are going to increase our market share of our staff in the US to make sure that we are ready to be a committed advisor to the American energy companies. And this is something which summarizes our commitment to the maritime industry. It's important to recognize for all of us in DNV GL that we are not number 4 or number 5 in the international ranking of classification societies anymore, but that we are number 1. And with that role, a leadership position is attached, and this leadership has to be filled with substance. It has to be filled with important initiatives in terms of safety, energy efficiency, environmental issues, and it's going to be an interesting exercise to see how this company is going to fulfill these expectations. At the same time, we have to be cautious not to be regarded as a body which is pushing forward things which have not been aligned with our customers. That was something which has been mentioned in our committee that while there are many areas where we have to push new technologies, new procedures, new ways of looking at things in order to make them more efficient or safer, it is always important that classification is regarded as the natural ally of the ship owner and has to somehow follow his interests. But one thing is for sure, we will be more active in the maritime industry as member of Ajax, as member of maritime clusters. We will actively support those who are in favor of improving the safety levels in various industries, in various ship types, wherever this is necessary. That is something which is going to be recognized over time, and I am very keen on seeing how this is going to be reflected in the way how we are drafting our statements, how we are going to push forward our expertise and our knowledge, which we are now generating. You have to keep in mind that when you are surveying 13,000 ships, you have a clear idea of what's working and what is not working, where there is room for improvement, where we have to really look into new tools, new procedures, new tools and rules. So in this respect, this is something which will be rather a new way of looking into what the number one in the classification business has to provide. And surely we have looked at the former number one in the classification business, Class K, what they have done. We couldn't learn much about it, but we are now going to have a very systematic approach of what has to be done and how we are aligning our initiatives with our customer base. There are some practical implications for our customers. We are, as I mentioned before, we are going to make sure that there is a day-to-day support, that we are going to make sure that the changes which are going to be introduced and which are quite natural within a merger are going to have as little impact on the customer as possible, but obviously changes are going to happen. We have raised the question about the surveyors. They have to have additional training that a GL surveyor is entitled and equipped and qualified to look at a DNV vessel. The same applies to the DNV surveyors. There will be a lot of exchange and a lot of internal trainings. We will have to make sure that within the new building projects, surveyors from both legacy organizations will be involved. We have to coordinate our position with the flag states. There are some 130 flag states who have to be informed, who have to be involved in how we make sure that our surveyors are accredited, and many other questions. But as pointed out, we will have a bigger network, we will have a much better position to service our customers. There will be more surveyors at more stations, and that is already a competitive edge. Rules and certificates and statutory services is obviously extremely important for the maritime customers. Some customers were afraid that everything is going to change from day one. That is not the case. We are going to keep everything valid according to the rules, and when we have approved the new rule set, which will be a combination of DNV rules, GL rules, then we will work on changing all the necessary requirements. After the introduction of the new rules. We will obviously have to keep the old ones going till the last classified vessel has been scrapped. Now this is going to be an interesting process where we are going to build up a new rule book for all the ship types. At the same time, we have to keep the legacy rules in place till the last vessel is going to be out of the register. No need to worry, and all the contracts will remain in place for the time being, and that has been an important element in our discussions at the committee. This is something which is of major concern to our owners and our customers. They are obviously very interested that there is a stability. Some were concerned that with the merger there is less competition, but at the same time we are now providing a denser network, we are providing more services, and we are now going to invest in a very smart way in research and development, where you can argue that those organizations have concentrated on various topics, but we were not able to merge their expertise, and that's something where we can clearly see that this is much smarter than before. And last but not least, I didn't mention that so far, but we will have advisory services in place. There are more than 300 consultants who are going to be at hand in all the regions to help customers when they have non-classificational issues, whether they are going to improve their operational setup on board of vessels, whether they are interested in new buildings, whether they are interested in new ways of defining the supply chain, and many other elements where we are going to pool our resources and provide the best impact for a given issue. And that's something where we really have another competitive edge to our competitors. And you all know FutureShip, which has been really a market leader now in the optimizing of ship hulls, and with the structural integrity teams at DNV, we are going to build up a real powerhouse in maritime advisory. And I guess that's it for this part. Are there any additional questions? Please.
Yes. Dr. Mager.